been here the whole time. I've been here singing you a song. I'll carry it. I know it hurts, it's hard to breathe sometimes. Inesi Bonono, Sasete Wing, Inesi Bonono, Sasete Wing, Inesi Bonono, Inesi Bonono, Sasete Wing, Inesi Bonono, Sasete Wing, Inesi Bonono, Sasete Bonono, Sasete Wing, my love's in Durban town, so far away, my love's in Durban town. So far away, my love's in Durban, so far away, my love's in Durban town, so far away, it's time to stop. It's time to stop. It's time to stop.
Drakensberg School of the Arts. Yes, Bianca, please. Chairs onto the podium. Our next item is a poetry by Zenzo Mobe. I'm not sure if Zenzo is around. Zenzo, Ukona? It does. All right. We'll move right on to the next item on the program. We have a number of speakers, as I said earlier, speaking on a number of things. There is a debate, an interesting debate happening later on. Preceding that will be formalities, acknowledgements, thank yous, as well as a talk on why we're here, a bit of context provided by Professor Kachalia, chairperson of the foundation. Perhaps I should call on you, Firoz, to come onto the stage, if you can. Please welcome you onto the stage. Please welcome you onto the stage. Mrs. Motlanthe, please, but after it, Firoz, please come on the stage. Directly. Bye.
Viva Di Boca, viva! All right, I think that was a good note to start on. but I'm not sure we're going to be able to sustain agreement without controversy through these next 2 days. Comrade President, Mutlante, Mutlante, see the Minister of Finance in front of me, several ministers and dignitaries, McKay family, members of the board, James Lacoma over there, and all of you, welcome. The focus of this fourth Drakensberg conference is appropriately once more on the endogenous, arguably self-created and self-inflicted elements of the multiple crises we face in our young constitutional democracy and creative choices we should be able to make to address them. Some themes we will be discussing over the next 2 days: slow growth and the challenge of inclusive growth, the energy crisis and the challenges posed by the just energy transition in an economy still dependent on mining, the erosion of the capacity of the state, particularly of the state-owned enterprises, substantially through the corrupt practices of state capture, and the challenge, therefore, of modernizing and professionalizing the public service, as well as the challenge of pursuing a common national agenda and social compacting under conditions of increasing party political fragmentation and possible coalition outcomes. But in this conference, by contrast with previous ones, there is much more emphasis, I think appropriately, on the BRICS, the Belt and Road Initiative, economic policy making in the current, quote, geopolitical space, and in a, quote, transitioning world economy. On all of these subjects of fundamental importance, we will hear a formidable, impressive list of speakers over the next 2 days. This focus on the external factor is necessary since we can no longer plausibly think about our country's internal dilemmas and choices as if they are unrelated to what in Davos apparently they are calling the global polycrisis. I have long been of the view that the current South African conversation has been too insular, transfixed by an unquestioned ideological way of thinking and analyzing the world. In short, thinking which is orientated towards justification of the status quo. How do I get? The time has arrived to be prepared to re-examine many of the taken for granted assumptions that arrived in the of the Foucaultian moment after the fall of the Berlin Wall, or perhaps a little earlier. 30 years ago or so, we were promised a new world order of inevitable economic progress, expanding liberty, progressive technological change, and democratic self-government under the leadership of a single benevolent global superpower. Instead, we have repeated financial crises generated not endogenously, but by greed and excessive risk-taking by financial elites in the global north, externalizing its costs across the globe including in South Africa. China and perhaps India, with some reservations perhaps, are outliers. But now, almost unbelievably, active steps are being taken to suppress China's economic growth and the well-being of its people, which count in the millions, in the name apparently of democracy and progress. Growing just inequalities, not only in South Africa, but in almost every jurisdiction across the globe, for which sucks up investment dollars to fund deficits and wealth creation at the center of the world system, while generating perennial debt, fiscal crises, economic stagnation, and perpetual poverty on its periphery in much of our continent. Are we to blame? I don't think so. The global dominance of an extractive technology-driven economic model, which former finance minister of Greece says combines elements of capitalism and feudalism. Democratic recession everywhere. So this can't be an excuse for intervention everywhere, especially in the global north. Not world peace, but endless wars initiated by the military machine in the north, and now an impending genocide in Gaza, authorized, legitimized, and financed by Western countries. For many in the global south, this suggests the continuation of colonial structures and mentality, and the rapacious, decrepit logic of empire in the 21st century. Whatever happened to the duty to protect and the law of humanitarian intervention used to justify military intervention in our continent in Libya, which has had devastating consequences, which we are now experiencing in the Sahel? Gustavo Petro, president of Colombia, describes this as nothing less than a crisis of life, since these wars are devoted to ending all life. The war world, in all its dimensions, economic and political, is now passing on in transition to something else of uncertain contour and definition. I do not lament its passing. Its requiem is long overdue. Two critical questions arise for us in this context, for this conference, which we can only answer once we have surrendered illusions and invited back our intellectual and political horizons, our capacities for creative thinking in pursuit of the noble goal of justice for our people, a better world for all of humanity. What choices in the emerging global environment of constraint and possibility? Because we can't move simply from critique to policy. An emerging environment of both a possibility and a constraint, are there now for us to renew a project to promote the well-being and common interests of our people in the light of our original emancipatory hopes? We've now adopted a much diminished view of what we can accomplish, which we sometimes appear to have forgotten when we stand on the shoulders of giants like Cabral and Mandela and Nyerere. And the second and related question is, how can we renew the ethos and institutional ramparts of our constitutional republic with a view to maintaining, defending, and elaborating upon the individual and collective freedoms we fought so hard to achieve and which we continue to value so highly? At our last conference, Stephen Mpofu Walsh, quite correctly in my view, posed the question whether 3 decades after our founding as a constitutional democracy, we now are in a moment of a second founding of our constitutional republic. Indeed, I think we are. Think about the range of institutions that are being re-examined and considered for restructure that are being re-examined and considered for restructure to be restructured. Elected systems, state-owned enterprises, the entire public service, local governments. But always excluded from this discussion are private companies, how they are organized, and the purpose of discussion. But this new constitutional moment is not taking place under conditions of deliberative rationality, political convergence, and emancipatory hope that prevailed 30 years ago. We should try and remember the scale of that achievement. Can we pull something like that up again? A second under the conditions we now face. This is a time of much greater pessimism, deeper divisions, and fragmentation in our society and in our politics. This, I think, is one of the fundamental questions facing this conference. When faced with such fundamental questions, the mind will often advise skepticism and defeatism, but the world pushes us relentlessly forward. This ongoing respectful dialogue among equals in these magnificent surroundings in the Kingdom of KwaZulu-Natal, disagreements among people might have many disagreements, but are also bound together by common passions and commitments will help. This capacity for reflective discussion and argument among equals is surely one of the main resources available to us as African people, born 30 years ago to fulfill the promise of our nationhood. Nkosi Sikelele, Africa. I thank you all and look forward to listening, learning, and conversing with you all over the next 2 days. Amandla Aweti.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Food for thought. A lot of issues to tackle. We are at a very precarious time with a lot of things happening, not only domestically but also globally. You've given us a few ideas to ponder on as we go on to deliberate for the rest of the weekend. Next is Mrs. Motlanthe to give us remarks, as well as a member of the foundation, rather a trustee, and also to acknowledge. Apparently, there are a few people that need acknowledging, and she's here to do that. Mrs. Motlanthe.
And Chair, Professor of Political Science, Professor Mdevis Mdejane. He's on this platform for the second time. He once chaired with Professor Nick Benadel, who has done a sterling job for the past, was it 3 or 4 years, Nick? Yeah, 3, yes. The trustees of the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation present, the patron, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, the chairperson, Professor Firoz Kachalia, Mrs. Nazira Kachalia, Mr. James Likoma, the directors of Champagne Sports Resort, Mr. Roger McKay, the directors of Champagne Sports Resort, Mr. Roger McKay and Mrs. Fred McKay, the staff and management of Champagne Sports Resort, and all KMF staff and stakeholders. It gives me great pleasure to welcome and thank all guests who are here tonight and those joining us tomorrow. The Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwane and Mrs. Thandi Godongwane, welcome and thank you, Minister. You know, a lot of the deputy ministers sent in apologies. In absentia, the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition, Mr. Ibrahim Patel, will be joining us for the panel on trade and commerce tomorrow. The Deputy Minister of Culture, Mr. Park Stow, is joining us later. Is he here? No, yeah, he's joining us later. The Deputy Minister of Police is also on his way. The Deputy Minister of Transport, Mr. Lisa Manu and Mrs. Pumeza Manu. The Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mr. John Jeffrey, is also joining us later. The Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, Ms. Fundi Chazibane. Chairperson of the Development Bank of South Africa, Professor Mark Swilling. Former Minister and Presidential Climate Commission Deputy Chairperson and Chair of the Constitutional Hill Trust, Mr. Vali Musa and Mrs. Elsa Gibes. Former Deputy Minister of Finance and MTN Chairperson, Mr. Mtsebisi Jonas and Mrs. Mateko Jonas. Former Premier of Gauteng, Mr. David Makura, is also on his way. We all underestimated this journey, and we keep them. David said to me, he's flying to KZN. And I said to him, we're underestimating this journey. From Durban to here, it's still going to be 3 hours, and your flight, it's going to make it 4. Former Director General in the Presidency, Dr. Cassius Lubisi, and Dr. Nwabisa Ngungwana. Former Director General, Mr. Trevor Fowler, in the Presidency, I think. Trevor's here now. Yes, he's here. And Mrs. Thelma Fowler, former Statistician General, Dr. Pali Lehotla and Mrs. Lehotla. In absentia, also joining us tomorrow, the Statistician General, Mr. Rusenga Maluleka. The SA Auditor General, Tsakane Maluleka. The Deputy General Secretary of the Federation of Union of South Africa, FEDUSA, Ms. Rifda Ajam. The Deputy General Secretary of the Federation of Union of South Africa, FEDUSA, Mr. Ashley Benjamin, Executive Chairman of Yellowwoods and Director of PSA and Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, Dr. Adrian Eindhoven and Mrs. Dominic Eindhoven. Co-Chairman of the Youth Employment Service, Mr. Colin Coleman. Chairperson of Armscor, Mr. Philip Dexter, President of African Ophthalmology Council, Dr. Khaul Lehodi and Dr. Tsefo Lehodi, the ambassadors, high commissioners, the diplomatic corps, the People's Republic of China, Ambassador Chen Xiaodong and Madam Zhen, the EU delegation, Ms. Sandra Kramer and Mr. Cees Jan Kramer, the Arab Republic of Egypt, High Commissioner, Mr. Ahmed Taher Al-Fadli and Mrs. Habiba Adel Razek, Ambassador of Cuba, Ambassador Gonzalez and Mrs. Rosabel, Ambassador of the Central African Republic, Mr. Andre Zapayeka, High Commissioner of Kenya, Ms. Catherine Mungai Mwangi, High Commissioner of Mozambique, Ms. Maria Manuela Lucas, the Resident Coordinator of the United Nations, Mr. Nelson Mufa and Mrs. Cynthia Mufa, Dr. Fatima Al-Sheikh, Advisor to the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, Badia, Professor of Dutch Politics in Leiden University in the Netherlands, Dr. Simon Ortjes, members of the media, our voice beyond the room. Our universities and institutes and all delegates play a pivotal role in setting the bar and the highest standard that we have become accustomed to in the deliberations came fora. The strategy professor, Gordon Institute of Business, Professor Nick Benadel, former executive director of Mapungube Institute for Strategic Reflections, Mr. Joe Nechidenze, Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, Professor Letlokwa George Mbedi, Vice Chancellor of the University of Western Cape, Professor Tyrone Pretorius, and Professor Anita Padmana Punanami. Hey, please help me, Anita. The Chairperson of the SA National Commission, UNESCO, and former Vice Chancellor of UJ, Professor Aaron Rensburg. To our sponsors, we express profound gratitude. The principal sponsor is EPSA Group and all EPSA representatives. We had the honor to be addressed by the Group CEO, Mr. Ari Rautenbach, last year. Tonight, Mr. Dion Raju, Group Chief Risk Officer, will do the address. The People's Republic of China, we acknowledge Ambassador Chen Xiaodong, Madam Zhang, and the delegation, and thank you for supporting us. Health practitioners, we acknowledge the Chairman, Mr. Tsepo Mashwele, and Mrs. Dolly Mashwele, and the delegation. The EU delegation, we acknowledge Ambassador Sandra and Mr. Jan Kremer and the EU delegation, and we thank you for your support. Aspen Pharmaceuticals, we acknowledge Mr. Stas Nicolau and Mrs. Maxine Nicolau and the support. Thank you all for honoring Kulua. For those who may not know, Kulua is the nickname of former President Kgalema Motlanthe and loosely translated Big Brother. And of course, Kulua is everyone's friend, person, and Big Brother. The KMF Drakensberg Forum is but one of Nkulua's legacies. Die naweek is ons in competitie met die bokke. Everybody went to France, I'm telling you. At KMF, dialogues are about one focal area. Through the years, we are immersed in the lives of young people with a keen interest in their education and development. Our programs extend a helping hand to those in need. We are not alone in this work. Together with many curriculum partners and stakeholders, programs are designed to improve the quality of education with a focus on STEM, the arts, and food security in community schools. We engage with young people in order to expose them to new opportunities with a strong focus on active citizenry, using their skills in the community. The programs are financed by fundraising and from well-wishers. The staff at KMF are all deployed by empathetic business organizations for a limited period. As a matter of culture, we work in an environment where skills transfer is continuous to the lifelong learning process. The KMF collaborates with many public and private sector organizations in different educational and outreach initiatives. We are active supporters of the education transition of learners and the use of real-life examples in innovation, current and future jobs and trends to ease the burden in public schooling system to offer all-round mentorship in this digital age. Children need to sift through information, make critical judgments about its validity, and come to a view about its implication. We are the guide on the side while they make informed choices about their well-being, education, and career choices and follow their own curiosity. The country has many economic opportunities in innovation and creativity. Despite evidence of great benefits, we continue to underinvest in the education of young people. Ladies and gentlemen, I greet you all from the bottom of my heart, more especially all the ladies in the room. Those of us who have the opportunity to be here have the responsibility to speak for those who could not be with us. The KMF Forum is a safe space for engagement in a dialogue amongst equals, which is the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation's motto. We are all invited with our spouses to engage in honest, rigorous, authentic, and forward-looking conversations that offer insights and analysis to address challenges and find solutions both on a global scale and within the context of South Africa and the continent. Colleagues Joseph Schumpeter reminded us in 1934, and I quote, "Public finances are one of the best starting points for an investigation of society. The budget is the skeleton of the state, stripped of all misleading ideologies, the truest reflection of the distribution of power and influence people, its cultural level, its social structure, The deeds its policy may prepare is written in its fiscal history, close quote. South Africa continues to be blighted by the significant and structural challenges of high unemployment, underpinned by low economic growth, alarming voices that we are potentially on the precipice of debt distress. The recent released National Planning Commission review of the progress made in the 10 years since the adoption of National Planning Commission review of the progress in the 10 years since the adoption of the National Development Plan in 2012 clearly shows that insufficient progress has been made towards the achievement of the NDP goals. The review goes so far as to say the NDP has been abandoned by government, and this has resulted in incoherent planning marked by deteriorating state capacity and inappropriate policy management. Further worrying is that social cohesion has shifted the government priority list and is articulated superficially. Trust levels have plummeted in most major institutions. A national election is in the offing in 2024, which has the effect of amplifying differences and further increasing the political and social tensions, which in turn lessen social cohesion. Others talk coalition formation at both national level for the first time since 1994, and probably at several provincial levels. We observe the chaotic government scenarios that have come to be since 2021 local government elections. How will we ensure that coalitions serve the public interest, and what will coalition politics do for our economy, our trade? Does the baggage we carry make us unfit for coalition politics? On a lighter note, the Italian coalitions, I'm sure I would not describe them as stable, but the economy still produces fashion, Ferrari, and pizza. In our age of information, where the world's problems are but a click away, we are immersed in a sea of complex issues: the negative impact of climate change on the continent to Black Lives Matter, gender-based violence, immigration to healthcare, a unipolar versus a multipolar world, LGBTQIA+ rights, nationalism versus globalism, use of renewable energy versus fossil fuel sources, and the Western world versus the global South, war and peace, and our own democracy. Minosha Shafiq in a book says, and I quote, "Humans have never disappointed, and this has revealed itself in politics, the media, and public discourse," close quote. Despite all the immense intellectual contributions in setting up our South African democracy in the early 1990s, we did not fully appreciate that what it would take to nurture, preserve, protect, ultimately safeguard our freedom. Our very existence now is about deep thinking on matters affecting us, our children, and our country. Thoughts are with us of promises that we feel will never be realized. But what is baffling is to see all the brilliant minds and hearts in many discussions and dialogues, and yet we live in a South Africa that has come this low. I don't think it's only about politics. At best, parties have only been part of the solution to our challenges, and in many cases, despite their promises, take us down with them. In this previous forum, speakers told us that the country has had bad policies, and even the good policies are not implemented. As ordinary citizens, the situation is worsened by frustrations of not being able to participate in solutions, as we are alienated from discussions to understand the full extent of what and where the problem lies. There's also the fear of being branded as biased. How do we find common ground when the gray areas are unexplored and we are constantly on edge, guarded against potential invalidation? Is this the reality of South Africa today, that our children will be raised in a society where the fabric of crime, corruption, and job uncertainty styles them? We are already inundated with new responsibilities, the world threatened by new pandemics, grossly unequal education, business failures, joblessness, stagnant wages, increasing inequality, deep societal divisions, and dysfunctional local government, and a collapse of state entities in a race to the bottom. I would guess and say almost everyone with us today has been able to insulate him or herself from the broader South African realities. We are the broader South African boreholes, inverters, solar panels, and so on, and the list. This insulation, dare I say, alienation, where it exists, is at best temporary. In a world of rising poverty and desperation, a world where we leave everyone behind in our desperation, and a world where we leave everyone behind in our indifferent attitude. Just like schooling, if the public schooling is not good enough, there are private schools. When will we make it our duty, and who will fix things? We have a stake in building schools worthy of our learners' promise. The country no longer has capacity to fix anything. Trying to fix anything, we have come to know, we ended up fixing nothing. New choices have to be made. It is our right to shape a new social contract that will provide a better future and tap into all the capabilities of society to increase productivity and to build afresh. We hear this all the time. Moments of crisis are moments of opportunity. Please allow me to run through a few things in order. Today, the fear of being labeled affects the way we engage in public discourse, especially on the contentious and divisive matters that challenge deep ingrained beliefs and the status quo. When we are afraid to express our thoughts openly, the very essence of democratic discourse is at risk. From the chaotic freedom, the more our democracy matures, the less it is about what is right. The signals of low levels of education and lack of consciousness are loud. The path to freedom and democracy is supposed to contribute to the progression of the fabric of society and be an enabler out of poverty. Every society includes education as a central part of its social contract. We should be speaking about free and compulsory education, and there should be no trade-offs between building more education institutions and investing in good quality education. How do we reinstall institutions and investing in good quality education? How do we reinstall confidence to apartheid today? Because we did not tear it apart. Instead, we reconfigured the apartheid economy to serve some new elites. We are a nation built on our differences and guided by the belief that we are created equal and always stronger together. But no integration is in place, not even being able to cross the color bar line. I would argue that it's not possible to achieve an inclusive economy without Black economic empowerment. How do we fix BEE so that it serves the country? To be cynical, it sometimes feels like we are managing an economy to maintain privilege and poverty rather than the pursuit of national unity and prosperity. Affirmative action has been more of a rebound. People still fend for themselves. We need vibrancy and for it to be representative. When it is convenient, we do not distinguish between BEE, corruption, and redress. We blame one for the other. If we do not hold government accountable, that is our problem. Everything can stand or fall where there are resources. Electricity, firelight, logistics, etc. The list is endless. The failure of goods to be delivered delegitimizes the state. Others also have troubles. But the difference is that the public-private partnerships are able to pull themselves without government involvement. Business must realize that it has now become existential for them to take the lead. The citizens have largely given up. With communication, I'll leave that. Please, yeah. Crime continues to rob law-abiding citizens of their freedom, and it is only the state that has the monopoly to fight crime. Millions of young people cannot perceive or imagine their lives without crime, and yet we are calling on them to lead. We need to face the facts. Going with the flow has eaten away at our resources and has fractured our economy, and our confidence as a country is shaken as a result. As citizens and as leaders alike, all of us together must take the blame. In the last forum, the governor highlighted the opportunism that has become common when one thinks it doesn't matter if the funds are there or not, we expect to get them. We also think we can borrow our way out of problems with no clue and intention to pay back the money. Somehow, when we have problems, we think that all we have to do is break the institutions that work. That's what the governors. Colleagues, by now, we should all appreciate that the Messiah in Madiba has come and gone. At KMF, we are convinced, based on our interaction with stakeholders and communities through our programs, that people in government, business, civil society, and broader society are aware of what needs to be done to arrest the slide in our fortunes. So often, there are people that can and want to help, but they can't if people in leadership hold on and control the narrative tightly. In our personal renewal and service, we must rededicate ourselves to the very idea that if it was not for chance, we, the fortunate and the unfortunate, might have been each other. In the words of poets Sapere Aude, I'm not Italian, dare to know, dare to think critically, dare to engage. In doing so, we shall emerge as enlightened stewards of our shared African discourse. I thank you.
Thank you, Kuku. We've had to change our program slightly to enable ease of discussion. Next, we'll Dion Raju from APSA to tell us about risk and prospects of growth in our republic. I hope you come bearing good news, Dion. Please welcome him onto the stage. By the way, you have 10 minutes. Mrs. Motlanthe kind of took advantage there. 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mrs. Motlanthe. You've covered the calls, thankfully, for me, so I can get straight into it. The Springboks are certainly competing for all our attention this weekend. Some of us have gone over to support our boys, but I'm sure the rest of us that are going to be here tomorrow night are going to be in that pub cheering boys on as loudly as if we were in the stadium. So let's really stand behind our boys. They truly play for South Africa every time they speak. They speak about purpose. And, if we all had that higher purpose rather than that egotistical purpose, I think South Africa could really, really be a wonderful place. So we've got a small shining example. Let's scream our loudest from here tomorrow night. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there tomorrow. Your Excellency, the former president and patron of the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation, Mrs. Motlanthe, and trustees of the foundation, honored guests, it's an honor to be here at the breathtakingly beautiful Drakensberg. Thank you, Roger Frederick, for your wonderful hospitality. And to be among so many distinguished minds, gathered together for a common goal, to engage in meaningful discourse and drive actionable change for our beautiful nation and continent. I wish to thank the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation for curating such an essential event and fostering dialogue amongst equals. APSA is both privileged and proud to collaborate with the foundation in this noble endeavor for inclusive growth. Inclusivity is a word that has been repeatedly echoed in our collective narratives for the longest time. When we speak of inclusivity, we are referencing not just economic indicators, the way of living and governing that ensures everyone has an equal chance at prosperity. From the policies enacted by government to the strategies adopted by business, from educational systems to the very fabric of our communities. Inclusivity calls for an approach that places the well-being and opportunities of every individual at its heart. It's not just about financial prosperity, but about creating environments where every voice is heard, every potential is nurtured, and every individual, irrespective of background, has an unobstructed path to realize their dreams and aspirations. This holistic view ensures that as we progress, no one is left behind. It is progress in its truest form. Yet path towards our cherished ambitions is strewn with challenges. A primary concern is global risk, which brings uncertainty, particularly impacting the growth and development prospects of South Africa and the wider African continent. The operational environment for businesses is facing rapidly emerging risks, posing significant challenges. Macroeconomic factors, both globally and locally, exert immense pressure on countries, companies, and individuals. These strains become evident when we see global and local liquidity and cash flow stresses. The era of cheap and abundant liquidity appears to be drawing to an end. Delving deeper into some of these imminent risks that we anticipate will impact businesses, including ours, in the near term the most. Firstly, geopolitical instability and conflicts leading to global polarization are affecting the ease of trade. This continent needs to be able to trade freely with all parts of the world in order to achieve its full growth potential. Country and sovereign risk has surfaced due to rising concerns about debt sustainability and liquidity pressures on sovereign entities. This has resulted in many countries being under IMF programs, requiring debt restructures and tight fiscal and monetary policy measures, impacting the population. Operational resilience risks are becoming more prevalent due to deteriorating infrastructure, climate events, external threats like ransomware, fraud, and other security and criminal activities. Furthermore, consumers face immense stress due to the twin effects of escalating interest rates and inflation, combined with shrinking economic opportunities. In addition, a broader investment cycle remains unlikely, given weak business confidence, and we see this continuing to constrain growth prospects. All these risks resonate differently here than in most developed nations. While some regions have the financial muscle and established institutions to withstand such shocks, many African nations still grapple with foundational challenges that amplify the impact of these global risks. That said, at ABSA, we see the opportunity in every challenge. We remain hopeful that the current reforms, despite being painful and a drag on growth, will help put growth on a higher trajectory in the long run. In addition, while the issue of electricity supply also remains a potential growth risk for the economy, recent policy changes to enable private generation is gathering significant momentum on the ground. And we are seeing committed investments that we expect will create skills development, jobs, community upliftment, and ultimately make the economy more resilient within the next 5 years. Africa is also well placed to benefit from the global green energy momentum with our abundant renewable resources. Finally, global logistic delays and escalating prices has made regional manufacturing and trade more competitive, supported by the African Continental Free Trade Area framework. In the face of ever-present global uncertainties, Financial institutions such as ABSA understand our significant responsibility in driving positive change. And in particular, strategic vision goes beyond traditional banking. We aim to be a force for good in every endeavor we undertake. This guiding principle means that we do not merely manage risk, but turn them into pathways that open doors of opportunities for our clients, partners, and most importantly, the communities in which we operate. ABSA's partnership with the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation is a shining example in action, as well as our commitment to inclusive growth. The global landscape of risks and uncertainties might look ominous, but within it lies the promise of a brighter, more inclusive future. It is up to the combined will of governments, business, civil societies, and most importantly, people of Africa that will determine our path forward. The global risk before us can be best mitigated when leaders from all sectors of society unite, acting in concert as a cohesive ecosystem. And there is no more fitting platform for such collaboration than here at the esteemed Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum. Let us not just weather the storm, but let us harness it to propel our ship forward. Thank you.
Good training. Thank you, John. We now move on, getting into more and more substantive issues that we're here to ponder. I'm going to ask all the speakers that are going to speak for the next hour or so to come up and sit up in the stage here. Starting with the patron himself, Kulua. Please come onto the stage. Uhlale phansi. Next is our former Deputy Minister, Jonas, was fired by JZ. Ulapha, Jonas? Madiba is going to be speaking about policy instrument for securing the country's economic stability. Is cutting down on expenditure. It's interesting what happens to people when they become ministers. He's now cutting down. At some point, he's calling for more expenditure. We then have respondents to both speeches. Professor Nick Bandel, Professor of Strategy at Gibbs. Nick, please. Nick, please come up. Professor Tema Maseko, Acting Head of the School of Governance, Temba, please come up. In the end, going to be up and down in. And Kulua, we're going to start with you. Say a few words. And I'm going off the stage now. And after you, Madiba, I'm going to introduce. I'm going to introduce you to Kabir. Then Jonas, Nick, in that order, please. Kulua, please come onto the stage.
Good evening. All protocols observed. I think Ms. Gugu Motlanthe represented all of us in acknowledging all of you. And you are embraced Given the context of this weekend, we are hyper aware that the Springboks will be playing in the Rugby World Cup final, All Blacks, tomorrow evening. The Springboks' long walk to the finals entailed a defeat by the Irish, a grueling victory over Tonga, a nerve-wracking victory over the French, and literally snatching victory from the jaws of defeat against the English. And as they say, victory always goes to those with the clearest understanding of what the next step is. The idea of team sport as a philosophy of life is based on the understanding that human beings cooperate to produce the material means to support life. In life, people set goals which they endeavor to achieve individually and collectively. For instance, in the game of rugby, a match is won by the amount of tries, conversions, and accurate penalty kicks the team manages to score. In pursuing its strategic goal, a team employs certain tactics. Thus, the deliberateness behind each pass and tackle is a choice made with absolute intention, thereby positioning sport not just as a unifying force, as Madiba advised, but also as an educator. Sport has been used as a medium of instruction and expression since ancient times. It is part and parcel of calibrating a certain harmony between the body and the mind, as well as a reflection on human culture through the ages. Sportsmanship is the quintessential sporting virtue. It is also believed to be important to civic and cultural life beyond sport itself. And remember, by definition, culture is a historical phenomenon whose development is always shaped and determined by a succession of socio-economic formations. However, we're not here to talk about sport, so enough said about sport. Go, Boke, go! Currently, the world is going through one of the many periods of political and economic transitions. As society experiences fall of empires compounded today by climate change. Such transitions are seismic in nature and scale and are characterized by tectonic shifts in the institutions and centers of power, both political and economic. But we are familiar with these cycles of transformation and change in the natural ecology of the earth, in the evolution of civilizations, and in our own personal existence. Natural disasters and social upheavals continue to shape history and mold humankind. However, as we face our very own precarious stretch in the timeline of humanity, we realize more and more that the lessons of the past lie in the rubble, waiting for us to uncover them. Given a chance to review the crises that the global community faces today and tomorrow, we can observe and identify the telltale signs of gradual change that may assist in predicting a better future outcome, one that is underpinned by the ability to identify catalytic projects and opportunities to deliver equitable and inclusive growth to all. And I will come back to one such example in a few moments. The concept of global polycrisis may provide a necessary and productive framework with which to understand how layers of data can be applied to historical events in addressing major issues affecting humanity today and finding solutions. We understand that a global polycrisis occurs when crises in multiple global systems become causally entangled in ways that significantly degrade humanity's prospects. Just looking at our current history, we may clearly observe how global systems are susceptible to localized systemic risk. Our environmental, political, legal, economic, financial, and cultural systems are noted with such density that a relatively invisible element can destabilize and disable an entire global system. The Cascade Institute, a Canadian research center addressing converging global crises, says that the causal linkages by which one global crisis triggers or exacerbates another represents a growing danger to humanity. In the year 2019, right here at the Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum, the rationale to focus on local government and local economies was informed by the understanding that local government is the sphere of government closest to the people and is at the coalface of service delivery. A case should be made, therefore, on how to improve efficiency and capacity of local government and local economies through the informal sector and tourism. So, if we are to examine that data provided by the Minister in the Presidency for Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, it reveals that almost 90% of the 257 municipalities are in trouble, with 163 of them currently distressed and 66 totally dysfunctional. The Auditor General found that only 38 out of the 257 municipalities and only 2 out of the 8 metros achieved clean audits in the year 2021-2022 financial year. Many of these municipalities failed to fully spend their municipal infrastructure grants. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, in the spirit of finding solutions to weaknesses and problems in local government and economy, Mexico is a country with a population of 128.5 million people and has achieved an unemployment rate record-breaking levels at 2.7%. Comparatively, South Africa, with a population of 62 million people, is saddled with an unemployment rate of 32.9%, which is among the highest in the world. How did Mexico achieve these remarkable results? The answer is through tourism. In developing its tourist industry, the Mexican government had 3 main goals. 1, earning foreign exchange. 2, creating employment. 3, diverting internal migration towards tourism development hubs. The 2000 entitled Economic and Social Impacts of Tourism in Mexico, in the Latin American Perspectives Journal, explains that Mexican tourist development was state-led with major investment in infrastructure and capacity building, as well as creating an enabling environment for the informal sector to trade and grow. The article demonstrates the impact of Mexico's state-led tourist development on reaching its national goals with significantly expanded employment creation in tourist services such as restaurants and hotels, and in the construction of tourist accommodations and attractions and local infrastructure in tourist centers. Tourism is therefore a catalytic sector that may offer countless opportunities for government to narrow down its focus and concentrate on all the issues that need to be fixed. For instance, enhancing the experience of tourists by providing safety and security for holiday makers, enabling an environment for heritage-based livelihoods, including arts and crafts, and local cuisine that can be enjoyed at both established and smaller informal kitchens, holiday accommodation infrastructure, leisure and adventure activities, tour guides, ground transport, two-way air travel, and all the spin-off industries that serve the variety of businesses in the tourism sector. However, we must appreciate that the ease of travel for our local and international guests is of paramount importance, including faster and easier South African visa application processes in more locations around the world, and the protection and securing of tourists and tourist destinations. Recently, on my return from Liberia, having to connect an South African flight, SAA flight in Accra, Ghana, I observed part of the connection section having an area designated for travelers to apply for tourist visas on arrival at the airport in Accra. In order to achieve the list of tourism virtues above, the Tourism Rating Council could create clear criteria for areas of improvement which earn a locality or municipality certain ratings, and those ratings should qualify them for clear government support to further boost the municipality. If a municipality's allocation is based on its capacity and know-how to properly spend the funds, then we could deduce that we should be directing more efforts toward a model of permanent state at the local government level, made up of trained professionals who have the required skills. However, the present division of revenue formula is skewed in favor of national and provinces or provincial tiers of government. We see a division of revenue of 48.3% of the budget to the national government, 41.5% distributed to provinces, and only 10% is made available to local government. Clearly, Treasury is following the Matthew principle to receive further privilege and accumulate more advantage over time, leaving those who begin with relatively little to become more disadvantaged over time, ever widening the inequality gap. Matthew 12:13 states, and I quote, "To those who have shall be given, and to those who have not, even the little that they have shall be taken away from them." Close quote. they have shall be taken away from them. Close quote. Empowering municipalities by identifying catalytic projects, such as the case of the informal sector through tourism in Mexico, identifying catalytic projects, such as the case of the informal sector through tourism in Mexico, investing in their capacity to drive local economic development and inclusive growth, and retaining human capital at tourist destinations outside of the urban areas could be a game changer for municipalities. Over time, South Africa should aim to achieve the division of revenue. I know it creates questions of chicken and egg, but if we don't pay attention to the need to strengthen local government, nothing will work, because this entity called national is made up of locals. And so it is important to try and over time work towards a better skilled local administration in the municipalities and do away with this conflation of elected public representatives pretending to be administrators, so that they focus on the strategy and allow the administrators to implement whatever 5-year plan that may have been adopted. Therefore, encouraging a higher spend at local level to improve capacity building for municipal staff could be an opportunity to unlock some of the economic opportunities available through tourism. Likewise, there are weaknesses in the African economic regional communities that could benefit from giving effect to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and advancing the interconnectivity and the intra-trade on the continent through the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation and Health Initiative could prove as an additional catalytic project that further contributes across borders and therefore accessing bigger markets. And we must always remember that political stability is a precondition for economic development through industrialization. Indeed, this year's forum is an opportunity to look into solutions to some of the enduring crises. Exact science, but given the creative power of all our ideas and the atmosphere to operate in a dialogue among equals, we should remember that the game of life requires a level of sportsmanship, deliberate choices, and clarity of what the next step is. I want to say thank you to my wife, Gugu, the executive trustee of the foundation, and the captain of the team steering the entire forum, for their tireless commitment to gathering all of us here in the Drakensberg, and for reminding us of the importance of the virtues of teamwork. And as I conclude, I implore all of you to engage robustly as equals in this safe space at the foot of the Drakensberg Mountains. And I thank you for your kind attention. Program Director, the former President Mutlante, and protocol observed. Originally, when I was invited to address this gathering, the medium-term budget policy statement was going to be the 25th, which means Wednesday this week. Presiding officers of Parliament are in Angola as we speak. They have decided to postpone the medium-term budget policy statement to next Wednesday. What does that mean? People like Mr. who chair listed companies should know I'm in a closed period. People like Mr. who chair listed companies should know I'm in a closed period. I'm in a closed period. So, what am I going to do in that environment? In that environment, I'm going to tell you what you know. And tell you what you know, how what you know is my pain. And demonstrate what is the nature of that pain. And say, leave you with an agenda which I'm likely add to your shopping list of the agenda items you're going to deal with over the weekend. I'll also try and resolve those matters and contribute to this debate on Wednesday next week. The one thing I was told. Okay. Dion has helped me because what I wanted to talk about are what are the headwinds globally and how are they is going to impact in what we're going to do. I don't want to repeat in most of what you have said. Those are the global risks we're also facing. But what I want to show is what the IMF in September is saying about the South African economy. It says the growth is going to be 9%. Early in the year, they said it's going to become 1%. The Reserve Bank of India and them said it's going to become 3%. We're a bit, we said it's going to become 9%. Why was such a difference in the model? Is one issue. Is the intensity of load shedding. How you model load shedding gives you different outcomes. We're a bit optimistic that we're not going to have intensive load shedding this year. Outcome in the first quarter was different. So I'm not going to talk much about that. What am I doing? I'm getting lost in the use of the technology. I want to go back. I want to go back. I'm lost in the use of technology. I'm using the same thing and going fast. I'm going to fast forward. Let me just say this is where the economy is of South Africa, starting from the global and from the pandemic. So we're trying to recover from that. We're having what I call a rocky road from the pandemic. And that rocky road is not promising. Investment is not promising as well. And as a result, the sum effect of all of that, what has made this thing more painful for us is that the load shedding we predicted has become more pronounced. If you look at the number of whatever, load shedding has been more pronounced than we thought. What are the implications of that for us? But before dealing with the implication of load shedding, let me look at logistics. Logistics have also come very badly. Let me just use the coal line, which is a familiar line I like, the coal line. In 1996, we had about 56 million tons to Richards Bay. Since then, we've been hovering above 70 million tons through Richards Bay, about 77 million tons. 2021, we came back to 1996 levels. 2022 to below 1996 levels. What are the implications of that? You must have read the Sunday Times. Siriti said they're going to return about 35,000 employees. So there's a knock-on impact on the economy. Kumba is sitting with a check of 9 million can take to port. And that has got serious implications for the revenue side. But before going to that revenue side, all of what I've said about the economy, if you look at GDP per capita, we're becoming poorer. The key challenge probably for this room and everybody here is how we're going to reverse that trend. Coming to the revenue side, I've said the intensity of load shedding has been more pronounced. Logistics has become much difficult. What has happened? Rising from the first quarter, revenue fell substantially than we predicted. You can see that line at the tail at the end. Revenue has fallen. See that line at the tail at the end. Revenue has fallen, which means I don't have money. The last, which is beginning to ease, became better in April, when the American ambassador said we loaded arms in late arms. Everybody became scared that we're likely to have secondary sanctions, and markets tightened. Even on the borrowing side, became less than we predicted. That's my pain. My pain as a result of the performance of the economy than we predicted. There's less revenue. That's the pain. I said I'm going to tell you about my pain. Parallel to that, expenditure is growing. I'm losing revenue, that expenditure is growing. This that I've got to find a balance. I'm going to find now a growing fiscal bank. If we project the loss of revenue over the next few months at the beginning of the year, well, we have serious challenge. And that serious challenge is reflected by the Reserve Bank. It's not me, although they say they take it from me. If you look at that green drop line, the Reserve Bank is saying sooner or later, we're going to run out of cash. Sooner or later, we're going to run out of cash. What complicates that line is public debt. By the way, 1847, right now, when I was about to take the platform, somebody sent me a WhatsApp and says, as you ponder what you're going to say, given that you are going to the medium-term budget policy statement next week, what you are going to say in Drakensberg, think about a saying, until death us apart. It's unfortunately a former Minister of Finance who shall remain nameless for the purpose of this discussion. So what is happening to public debt?
Public debt is sitting at about 4.5 trillion rand. As a 32. Massive. I normally say that's not a major problem. What that means in every rand that we collect, roughly about 18 cents goes into servicing debt. A complicating factor, our cost of borrowing have been rising for a number of reasons. If you look at the budget, within the red line, and in February, our cost of borrowing in February was sitting at that. By 30th of June was the dotted line, by the 29th of September was the gray line. Another complicating factor, which started, by the way, with the downgrade, FATF, and other things. You can see foreigners are not buying our bonds anymore. That's what the other slide shows. Now, this growth interest differential. Growth is the gray line. There's no growth at all. But interest payments and our gross are rising substantially. Now, I normally say to people, your problem with debt is not its size. The problem with debt is the capacity of the economy to service it. In this environment, in this trajectory, service that debt is becoming constrained. And therefore, we do something about it. Now, let me take a different line. If you see that the police budget in this current financial year is 111 billion. Health is about 253. Education is about 306. Debt service costs are the single biggest item, sitting at 366 billion. What complicates your problem is that not only have you got debt service costs, you've got to redeem all debt. The next pack of slides that you see there is debt resumption. This year alone, the amount we're going to redeem is such that if we don't do anything, we won't have cash by the end of March, starting from December. Am I scaring you too much? Sorry, man. I'm going to sort you out. Don't worry. Another problem is corruption and leakages. Linked to that is corruption and crime, but I've chosen corruption leakages. I've taken a slide from the IMF, which highlights some of the areas of corruption which are common in different jurisdictions. Some of them may not be common in South Africa, but common in South Africa, we've got something like called ghost workers, procurement systems, and so on. Let me show the procurements. If you look at that slide, the red line globally, normally where your leakages happen, is on the procurement system. The red line is the procurement system, which demonstrates that unless one leakage you have, I'm saying my challenge is the performance of the economy. Secondly, and that performance of the economy is impacted on revenue. And thirdly, my debt service costs are rising. And fourth, leakages in the system in the form of corruption. Now, turn off some stuff I've taken from some people as to what are the key things we need to do in order to that. We need to have the right legal framework. We've got to have good governance. And that good governance that could be underpinned by, for instance, your procurement system is going to be digitalized. If we had a proper procurement system, we could have picked up what was happening in Tembisa Hospital. So we're going to look at how we do those things. Professionalize this. So I'm just seeing a slide which I picked up from the IMF fiscal monitor for 2018, which chapter 2 of which was focusing on corruption. What it does show, if you focus on corruption, your tax revenues rise. The red line is an increase in anti-corruption measures. The blue line is an increase in revenues. So there's a correlation between increase in anti-corruption measures and increase in revenues. Those are some of the things we need to be looking at. The other problem is an infrastructure gap and then financing. There are two aspects of this thing. I'm going to demonstrate one in a moment. I suspect I'm less than the time gave me. I'm going to conclude. Don't worry. I'll save you time. If you look at that slide, you probably get if you can see the numbers properly. I want to see the second portion of it, not the economic classification, but the division of that between different spheres of government. If you look in this current year, national is going on infrastructure is going only 15 billion. Of course, the 31 billion then goes in public entities. You can also add into national. But if you go to municipalities, the amount is 68 billion. You go into provinces, a similar amount, 60 billion for infrastructure. Where is the problem? It's a capacity issue. A state capacity issue. Now, we need to find that capacity is not only technical, also political. It's also political, that capacity. Key things, I said I'm going to add to the addendum. I'm not going to answer some of these issues for now, but it is to be done. The key thing is to anchor this economy, the fiscal policy properly, macroeconomics program. And we've got to curb that runaway expenditure and debt. Now, I'm not afraid of labels. If you, Minister of Finance in an environment like this, they call me Mr. Austerity, which I don't like, but I can live with it. You know? So, first thing we've done is to manage this thing in a more prudent way. Do a combination of cutting expenditure and bumping up borrowing. Not going to tell you the numbers now. We've been forced to bump up borrowing a bit more than we have predicted in the year, because if we didn't do that, the cuts would have been more massive. So we have to do a combination of both. A second leg of that is investment in infrastructure. Again, that investment in infrastructure, we've got to find a prudent solution of making sure that we can achieve efficiency at a number of levels. The first efficiency level we need to do is to be able to generate quality pipeline. You know, we went with Ibrahim Patel to the United States to kind of fight with the Americans over LDR. In between, we're meeting a number of people. One of the people we met is a fellow from JP Morgan. We said, you know, you guys have got a good pipeline, but it cannot be invested because it's not translated into any projects that can be financed. That in one is going to require a different skill. Secondly, is an execution problem. Moving forward, we're trying to make sure that we can deal with those two issues at the same time. We think we can say something by the 21st of February next year on those issues. Thirdly, structural reforms. We've got to move and solve the electricity issue once and for all. It's unacceptable that we have been for 15 years trying to grapple as to how can we sort out electricity. Part of the problem, my criticism of myself, because I've been part of government, we've been focusing more on fixing ESCOM than on fixing power to the grid. That challenge confronts us with the second problem, logistics. We're going to focus more in fixing Transnet, not in fixing logistics and getting product to the port. And that's another danger, and we put more money. Between 2015 and now, ESCOM has consumed about 283 billion rand. Moving forward, we've said we're going to give ESCOM another 254 billion rand, of which 70 billion rand is due this year. Now, it's not resolving putting more money that we're not getting electricity. You know, I phoned Ivan Jim when he was demanding 15%. I asked, hey, Jim, how do you get 15% in a poor company? Poor, they don't have, they're bankrupt. They want me to bail them. Secondly, they're not giving us electricity. You and your members are not giving us electricity. How does that work? So your fourth problem is crime and corruption. I've focused there in that slide only about on the corruption, but crime is a major constraint to growth. You can't say, if you last the construction industry, when they could not move projects and build projects of more than 10 billion rand last year because some people could rock up and demand 30%. What kind of country is that? So crime is important, is impacting on the economy. On tourism, if somebody shoots in national park, many tourists, which become a first page in the entire European Union. Europeans at the moment are fed up. 40 million of them used to go to Russia. They're fed up with Russia. They can't come to us because we kill people. So the crime issue is a major issue for the economy. State capacity is an important point, particularly at a municipality level. State capacity, 57 municipalities, 175 of them have what is called unfunded budgets. What does that mean? Which means they sit in a council and say, we're going to meet, we'll fund things, but don't have money to pay for those things. Now, that's a political issue, that one. It's not an administrative issue. We've got to deal with the municipality. My mayor in East London phoned me at the beginning of the year. She says there's too much crime in East London. So she wanted to employ Metropolis. I said, by all means, do you have the money? She says, no, I'm going to collect more revenue this year. Well, and collect the revenue first and employ them. She disappeared, came beginning of the month now. She says, Minister, by the way, I need some advance for my equipment share. I said, why? She said, I've run out of cash. I said, hey, if we employed the Metropolis, what would have happened by now? So we've got to employ that sort of some state capacity exists. I've managed to demonstrate the infrastructure. Let me show you as I leave. If you look, take from 2020 to 23 and backward, read the red numbers only. Read the red numbers only. 28 billion last financial year, underspent. 31 billion the previous year, underspent. How much? A little drop there, and then back to those strategies. What does that mean? That means state capacity is a problem. Now I can say, people are saying, hey, you're going to cut departments. I can tell you now, worked on Wednesday is less than this, my cuts, because I've borrowed more. So my cuts are less than this under expenditure. I've borrowed more. So the message I'm talking about really is, here's an agenda item we've got to talk about. How can we utilize, develop state capacity effectively? Just winning state capacity, the rest of the other issues can be solved. The rest of the other issues can easily be solved. Once we have a state that is functioning, institutions that are functioning, that are functioning, everywhere that is functioning, and with integrity. When the police started moving in ESCOM, they had to bring everybody, the police and the magistrate and the prosecutor outside in Mpumalanga in order to get the job done. And I'm told if you go Mthatha, so you can't do anything. So the policemen, Kumkwati, the prosecutor, Mudlamini, the magistrate, Madiwa, they socialize together. So a similar situation exists in private people from outside. But I'm saying on all of these issues, on Wednesday, I've given you a grim picture, but we'll say positive things about that work we're doing. And I'm suggesting that also help us contribute in this debate. If there are additional letters, that I'm more than happy. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Let me thank President Halima Motlanthe, Cisco, and the Motlanthe Foundation. Motlanthe, Cisco, and the Motlanthe Foundation for once again convening this critically important forum of engaged, fresh-thinking South Africans who are bound by patriotic quest to redetermine the destiny of a country. Let me also thank the Minister of Finance for taking the risk in a closed period to give us a guideline of what is likely to come out in his budget speech. And you've done it very eloquently, Madiba. Let me begin where we left off when we last gathered here. The third Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum ended with a broad consensus that South Africa was off course, with warning lights flashing on all key social, political, and economic indices. We made the point that the 1994 consensus has passed its sell-by date, and the time has come to craft a new exchange. We said we needed to reimagine ourselves and how we look at the world. It was a time, we said, to conceptualize what we termed then the Second Democratic Republic. The problem, however, is that we left it there. Once we drove away from the mountains, Nkulua, we did not further the discussions or come up with concrete ways to act on the outcomes. In 6 months from now, South Africa will mark the 30th year of democracy. There could be no better time than now to have the hard conversations and venture out of our comfort zones. We must first ask the question as to why we need a reset agenda. I believe there are 3 broad areas where the red lights are flashing. The first is the democratic model itself. South Africa is a celebrated constitutional democracy born out of multi-party negotiations. But it is clear it is not working for millions of South Africans, many of whom are opting out. And if you see the rate at which eligible voters are not voting, it should be a point for worry for most of us. This undermines the essence of participatory democracy and could potentially undermine the legitimacy of government. Why is this happening? Is it just party choices that are a turn-off? Is it general disillusionment with politics? Is it the failure of accountability? Or are there bigger questions? Is the government system outdated? It was, after all, a product of negotiations between the liberation movement and the racist elite, ruling elite, both of whom had no idea of governing in democracy, or at least how governing in a democracy will turn out. The achievement of the early years were significant, but we must say that the failures of the later years are overwhelming. So we must ask, is this democracy still working? And if so, for how long? Does it have anything more to give? Can there be more squeezed out of it in the 2024 elections? In other words, will the tweaks to legislation to allow more independence and the advent of new parties shake the system significantly enough? If more people are choosing not to vote than those who do not vote, what does that say about the legitimacy of government? And if you recall, in 2019, 51% of eligible voters did not vote, and that's significant. The second issue is around political agency. It has become a trend, not only in South Africa, for people to vote for who they think is least objectionable, rather than the people who really represent their views and aspirations, their hopes and their interests. In our country, we have witnessed the slide towards populism and kleptocracy, whilst the state has been stripped of capacity and rendered virtually ineffectual. Any objective analysis of South African political scene has to include how the nature and orientation of the ANC has changed. Many of us yearn for the ANC of yesteryears, but we all know that that ANC no longer exists. The changes, sadly, have not been about modernizing or adapting to current conditions, to be more effective, to deliver services for all. If anything, the ANC has retained old rhetoric and irrelevant concept, even with more youthful people in leadership structures. Under normal circumstances, an aggressive drive to draw younger people into political leadership would be encouraging. Irrespective of age, leaders should be defined by their values and commitment to the greater good, rather than personal aggrandizement and the pursuit of power and wealth. This applied to all across political spectrum. The trend of political parties celebrating artificial victories will not take the country anywhere. Neither will the inclination to camouflage old-style politics with new black faces fronting for the old guard and vested interest. That also would not take us anywhere. The tendency to peddle conspiracy and blame problems on malign forces detract from where responsibility should lie. It demonizes contrarian views and thoughts. We must take responsibility for our problems and not blame others, counter-revolutionary or any other force. And this is becoming increasingly a common narrative that we're failing because there's counter-revolutionary. We're failing because of ourselves. We certainly need trusted leadership that can coalesce behind a set of values and principles, an inclusive agenda with achievable targets. While public discourse is dominated by political squabbling, the biggest political predicament South Africa faces is the lack of clarity of vision. There is no common idea that binds us. We do not know what we are meant to be working towards. Even with litany of plans, reports, and roadmaps, which are not in short supply, it is no wonder then that decision-making in government is so difficult. South Africa has been unable to adapt to changing conditions and global shifts, and was still held hostage by outdated ideological concepts. Our country, like many parts of the world, is witnessing a phenomenon that could best be described as demographic anxiety. Resentment of foreign nationals has become a major political factor driving party alignment and voter sentiment across the globe. The chilling effect of this phenomenon is its coupling with the dehumanization of the other. The war in the Middle East is a demonstration of the consequences of violent nationalism and the denigration of common humanity. The third area of concern is the state of society. It would seem everyone has lost their place. Government is full of people, but emptied of skill, capacity, and credibility. Business is struggling to survive the crippling power, logistics, and crime triumvirate, at the same time struggling to trying to implement the functions of government. Civil society organizations are battling funding challenges, and many are opting to steer clear of controversy to survive. Some are having their bona fides questioned as a way to suppress their work. Labor has lost its voice in public discourse as well as its leverage in politics. The media is generally not trusted as there are variations of truth and reality. People now want news that is packaged to confirm their perspectives and interest, not information based on objective reality. Misinformation sometimes trends more as truth. We have to ask, other than the Springboks, what else do we as South Africans really have to rally around? More seriously, what are we prepared to fight and die for as South Africans? I shudder to think that there is no common response to those questions. When we gathered here 5 years ago for the inaugural Inclusive Growth Conference, we were hopeful. We had turned the corner on state capture and we're on the road to growth and prosperity. We now seem to have tumbled from the euphoria of the new dawn into the dread of the dark night, with social anxiety, political disillusionment, and uncertainty looming large in the country. I'll actually not spend much time on what I was going to say because I think the numbers that the minister showed cover what I was going to say, but I will actually touch on our points nonetheless. There are a couple of them. Obviously, the first is points nonetheless. There are a couple of dilemmas that we must deal with. Obviously, the first is the economic and equality dilemma. The issue that smacks us in the face every day is the state of our economy. A big mistake, of course, many people make is to try to grapple with economic constraints in the economy without considering the political context. I'm one of those who still argue very strongly that fundamental to our economic failure is the bad politics. Weak growth remains our biggest bugbear. The core reasons for our economic growth are well known, and probably many people will recite them. From the untransformed economic growth model to lack of investment, of course, the global conditions add to that. The worsening of our economic issues are among the reasons the private sector is not investing. The triple P frameworks haven't delivered to date, with the obvious exception of the renewable energy program. It is still mind-boggling why government is dithering with PPPs when there is desperate need for private sector resources in the system. Private sector involvement in public assets remains a bogeyman, and yet business influence on politics decision-making is a new normal, probably across the globe. Global conditions are not conducive for FDI flows to the developing world, with high interest rates in the developed world keeping capital at home. Our non-aligned stance in the context of the emerging trend of friendshoring associated with shifting geopolitical sense also means we will be walking an investment tightrope for the next couple of years. The war in Ukraine demanded that countries define their positions and alignment. The war in Ukraine demanded that countries define their positions and alignment. I'm afraid that the war in Palestine will cause deeper fractures in the global communities, as this is profoundly effective. Trade relations are bound to become more weaponized and escalate. Even more, we're likely to see people across the globe retreating into religious, tribal, and ethnically exclusive enclaves. The world is definitely becoming a more dangerous place in which the voices of rationality are drowned out by the noise of the mob. Whether you look at in America, in the US, in Europe, you actually see this trend that the rationality is fast disappearing. In South Africa, I fear we're actually stepping into that direction, that public reasoning is declining. All of these issues ratchet up the pressure on political leadership and how it is exercised. In fact, it calls for leadership across all sectors. Transformation and the distribution of income benefits in society will always be a core dilemma in managing the economy. This underlies our weak growth also. A high asset and income inequality, we must understand it as also growth constraining. The Black productive stratum remains thin and has been dwarfed by the growth of the bureaucratic bourgeoisie, comprised of consumptive elite in government and the entrepreneurial class. That is less vested in growth and innovation and productivity. The second area, and again, the minister covered it very well, relates to the dilemma about the capacity of the state. And let's accept it that the impact of state capture is documented. The impact has been substantial. Dismantling of systems of control, the deprofessionalization of the state, financial loss, and weakened service delivery. Recently, of course, as the minister showed, with the fiscal crunch, intensified competition for dwindling state resources, we have seen dramatic upturn of violence, targeting competitors, whistleblowers, and perceived gatekeepers. You travel to any province, there's a death of every week, and shootings and killings of people. It is becoming increasingly difficult to attract high-performing executives and professionals into state employment. Another recent trend associated with declining state resources is the movement of corruption networks into private markets. The construction mafia being the case in point, with extortion now becoming significant investment constraint. With a number of professional hits and consolidation of underground criminal networks, we now resemble a mafia state. It will take time and enormous effort to rebuild the state to perform basic functions effectively. In the relation of state-owned companies, but I agree with the minister, it is at ground level where dysfunction is most devastating. And in fact, relegating a large sections of our population to become second-class citizens. In fact, the failure of state deepens inequality. South Africans who can afford private education, private healthcare, private security, and now even private access to electricity and water are trying their best to escape the state, whilst everyone else is dependent on the state or is at the mercy of the state. When rebuilding of the state occurs, it should not be in its past image. And that's another mistake. We don't only need to rebuild the state, we also need to transform the state. But it has to be made for future fit. We need a smart state that is digitalized and leverages technology for art to improve service delivery, accountability, and customer interface. The technology is available and inexpensive. Like so much else in our country, political will is missing in the transformation of the state. Because I think this topic has been ongoing. And political will, if it existed, would have made some progress in transforming the state. Of course, in doing that, we must take into cognizance climate change and green transition. A major sub-point, as we all know, is the misfiring of our state-owned companies. Clearly, we need a new model for state entities. We need to look more closely at international best practice. In Southeast Asia, Singapore in particular, government-linked companies, the GLCs, outcompete private firms. Significantly, they are corrupt-free, they are run and staffed by the most capable, and they are driven by the bottom line. We must also confront another difficult question in South Africa in dealing with SOEs, which is the issue of state monopoly, which has become a holy cow. I think the debate about really restructuring the energy sector and the logistics sector might also entail looking at the question of state monopoly. It is, to me, a contradiction for us to speak about deconcentrating the economy, retain state monopoly, even in areas where we all say government is monopoly, even in areas where we all say government is failing and will always fail. And that we need to grapple with as a country. In order to deal with the deficiencies of the state, business leaders have stepped forward to help tackle energy crisis, logistic bottlenecks, rising crime levels, and regulatory impediments to investment, which is probably a very laudable effort. However well-meaning that is, there are inherent dangers in trying to run the state from the boardrooms of Sandton. These include undermining the legal and constitutional authority vested with the elected government, regulating business influence on government, and allowing political office bearers to farm out their responsibilities to private players. This could be dangerous when the personalities in government change and in business also change. And if you know that personalities in government change, the possibility of having a rogue president is as possible as ever. So we can't think that. I always say that when we drafted our constitution, we had an image of Mandela as the president. Look what we got. The parameters of the intervention must therefore be properly defined, including measures of success and exit points. Equally, there must be a clear program to capacitate the state in critical areas of execution. Let me now turn to what could be a few interventions for research agenda. And I'll start with just the broad statements. Overall, South Africa still enjoys a relatively high ranking across most democracy metrics. But let's not run away. Our democracy remains fragile. Krestoff reminds us that old politics of compromise and consensus are gone and reduced in daily rhetoric by political leaders. consensus is becoming a secondary issue. There is almost like a confrontational tone emerging. And therefore, the possibility of a country sliding to authoritarian rule is not that far. And if we think the global experience of democratic backsliding shows that the major threats to democracy don't come through seismic events like coups, but rather to barely visible state-led weakening of democratic institutions and practices. It is those who win democratic power and control the state that weaken its institutions, making the state or the political parties who control the state the biggest threat to democracy. And it's a phenomenon across the globe. And South Africa, I would argue, is the difference. Our politics featured at the center of state capture, where politicians at the highest level facilitated mass looting and associated dismantling of institutions meant to protect national interests. We have that experience, therefore. There must be reform of the political system itself to manage risk of malfunctions in governing parties. Some might think the risk is less, as we're likely to enter coalition governments. But we must learn from Nelson Mandela Bay, the city of Johannesburg, and other metros where coalitions didn't improve governance. In fact, they worsened governance. A reset towards a second democratic republic must therefore ensure greater political accountability. Reforming the electoral system towards a constituency proportional electoral system, we should make presidents, ministers, and MPs more accountable to constituencies, is a definite necessity for the country. We have failed over the past 30 years to build an ethical and transformative leadership across political formations, and in fact, across most stakeholder formations. This must be the focus, starting with young. We need fresh approach to building a new moral code and forging social cohesion. This requires public education, mobilization campaigns, and benefits of and risk-facing democracy. There must be an effort to build deeper political consciousness for society to be constructively engaged with issues we face instead of being misled down the path populist uprising, which is a real possibility. This is an area where civil society must step up to play. Oversighting the key metrics which measure the health of democratic institutions and practices must be increased. Essential to the political reset is insulating the public sector from inappropriate political influence. Politicians must lead, take accountability, but the lines are crossed far too often, normalizing political interference and governance issues. The danger of political leaders using their positions to favor friends, family, and serve corrupt networks is real. South Africa seems to be trapped in a situation of either no decisions, bad decisions, or no implementation. Advisory boards and task teams can never fill the void of leaders who cannot lead or take place of dysfunctional government structures. They also cannot counter irrational public discourse. In conclusion, therefore, I want to argue that when we leave here on Sunday, and I think should be on topmost on our minds. When we leave here on Sunday, it would be important that we leave with a very clear way forward. Probably that includes a couple of steps that keep the momentum throughout the year. I think we are in a state where Yachamon calls the state that is extraordinary. That's the period we're entering. As individuals, we must actually accept the reality that if not us, there's nobody else who can fix our country. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mashaba. Thank you very much. And now, Dr. Mashaba, please. Thank you very much. 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 Than
Wow. Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be with you. What have you lost?
My pen.
The pen. Okay. 3. So, good evening, everybody. It's great to be back with you again, and I'm looking forward to the weekend's discussions. I think we can't respond to these speeches. They've been very broad, some provocative, stimulating, wide-ranging, and I think if you haven't made notes, well, we'll pick up these ideas as the weekend progresses. But the one thing we can say is the reality, as Mr. Bisi has just pointed out, is in the room. We know the conditions we're in, and they are largely grim. It's not that there aren't some great qualities and assets and initiatives, but they seem insufficient. And the challenges we face seem to be outrunning the answers we provide. And I'm sure, as I do every time I come to this meeting, what I'm going to do differently, and in part as Msebisi just ended. Why have we got together? Well, at least at one level, it's an individual journey of getting to talk to each other openly and honestly. And starting with Feroza's provocative challenge to us, the world, Mr. Mklante's thoughtful comments about our domestic, the minister's direct, which is his nature, honesty about the challenge he faces, and I know we all wish you well on Wednesday. And Msebisi's, as always, thoughtful overview. I think we've fully fed. I'm also just very cognizant of Maslow's hierarchy, that having been seated here for a few hours, your mind is moving down to the food. I just want to make one point about economics. I've said for many years that economic growth is the oxygen of democracy, particularly in this country, given its history. Without economic growth, our transformation project will simply unravel. Our debt levels, our ability to borrow, our fiscal arrangements, as you've heard, the lack of hope and jobs, the increasing inequality will just simply overwhelm us if we don't grow. And growth is not 1%. Growth has to be 5% and up for a decade and equally shared for us to stabilize democracy and build the social contract that South Africa needs. And I think we all share that point of view. I hope you do. This has been a dig deep year, and I've got no doubt that next year will be equally challenging. I think of South Africa like a big jigsaw puzzle, a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. But someone's gone off with a box. And so we've lost the central image of what the vision is that we're trying to achieve, given our history, which is so difficult and so complicated. I've traveled all my life. I was born in Zimbabwe. I lived in Germany, England, Yemen, and Kenya by the time I was 10. And I've traveled ever since. And this year I was privileged to go again to Southeast Asia. I must tell you, when I was young, I thought Benoni was the Far East. But in the last 30 years, I've been inspired going to China, India, Japan. But this year, I took myself to Southeast Asia again. I spent 8 weeks on the ground in 7 remarkable countries. And I just want to share for a minute what it provoked me to think about our country, Mzansi. I went to Laos, which I'd never been to, Cambodia and Pol Pot, which I'd never been to, Vietnam again, Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia. And what I discovered as I studied these countries, because these days it's so remarkable, you can arrive in a place you've never been, walk the streets for a day, and then get back to your room, open your laptop, and within a day or two, you've got a grip of its history. And I came to 2 broad conclusions. The one in that area of 600 million people with 300 million scooters is that actually the political arrangements are so varied, from military juntas, dictatorships, communist parties, Malaysian incomprehensible coalitions, Singapore's authoritarian democracy, the Philippines, where, believe it or not, Marcos's son is the president, and Duterte, the daughter of Duterte, the ex-president who executed 8,000 criminals without trial, alleged criminals, is the deputy president, to Indonesia's somewhat repressed climate. I came away realizing it's true that politics drives economics, but in Southeast Asia, the people just get on with it. And the startling impact I had going to town after town and village after village was the people. And I don't think we spend enough time talking about social capital in our country. The need to trust and respect and know each other, which goes beyond the structure of politics, beyond the structure of the economy, but simply the organic trust and respect that is the only basis on which South Africa will overcome its past and the difficulties we've created for ourselves now. And so in making, at the end of that tour, I was asked to take part in a discussion when I was in Manila, a city of 22 million people. I took part in a discussion. I'll share them with you in the hope that you may think about them in the next few days. The first question that occurred to me is, are we in a crisis? Are we really in a crisis? Or is this just sort of a thing, a period, an adjustment? Or is it more fundamental? Is it a crisis? From what I've heard, than that brittle, brutal time of apartheid. But it is a crisis. No economic growth is a crisis. The level of corruption, the lack of state delivery, our education system, which we simply don't talk about, which is a time bomb we will harvest over 20 years, is a crisis. My second question for us to reflect on is, if you think it's a crisis, is it strategic or is it superficial? How deep is it structurally? And from what I've heard this afternoon, it's a strategic crisis, because every piece is connected to every other piece. It's like a plate of spaghetti where you pull one piece and every other piece is connected, from the economy to local government, from the state to business. It's all interconnected. So my argument would be it is strategic, it's fundamental. The third question I ask myself as we gather here is there a coordinated, comprehensive plan to fix it? We have many plans, but I don't think we have a shared plan, a shared, understood, communicated idea of how we're going to play the game, not tomorrow night, but in the next 18 months. We don't have a plan, I don't think. The fourth question that then occurred to me is, if it is a crisis and it's strategic and there isn't that clear a plan, is it reversible? Because in any system, it can reach a point where it's not reversible. I would argue our neighbor to the north is in that condition. It just gets worse and worse because it's not reversible. Is this reversible? And to come back to Mcebisi's end point is, what will we do about making it reversible? And the last question, which is the toughest, I think, is it possible, given our history, the imperialism, the colonialism, the apartheid, the era of democracy and building a constitutional society, and then the decline that we are seeing, is it possible as a society that we will accept failure? Many societies tolerate failure, and at the center of their failure, I think generally, are two components: the elites, who fail to care long enough or hard enough about the mass of people they claim to represent, and secondly, the professional and middle class. My study of Latin America tells me if the middle class sleeps, the elite can do what they will. And so we, as I think professionals, have a big question to answer. Will we accept failure? And I'd be very interested in the weekend to hear what your response is to those questions. Are we in a crisis? Is it strategic? Is there a plan you're comfortable with? Is it reversible? And might we accept failure? I look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
I'm looking at Google sitting in front here, and I see she's raising 3 fingers, which could be an indication that I've got very limited time to speak. I might as well just say bon appetit and let everyone go to dinner. But I'm just going to make a few points. The first one being, you've had very powerful, well-prepared speeches delivered here tonight. And what was very clear, as Nick has confirmed, is that there is a crisis in the country. But what is also, what I found missing in the conversation is what I want to term this evening a convergence of discontent. And that is, over the many years, over the past decade or so, many of the people who've been expressing their anger, dissatisfaction with government are the poorest of the poor who have not been receiving services for years, complaining and unhappy about hunger, unemployment, inequality, lack of food. But what you seem to be seeing over the past few years is that this crisis, because we in the middle class have always thought these problems affect the poorest of the poor who are fine. We've got salaries, we can put food on the table, and we don't need to worry too much. But the economic crisis that the ministers explained today, but also the day-to-day problems that we are beginning to experience in our lives, it's also beginning to cause discontent. The fact that when you drive home, you're not guaranteed that you'll be able to boil a kettle of water. The fact that when you go home, in some parts of the city, especially of Johannesburg, you're not even certain that there'll be water to boil coming out of your taps. So the crisis is creeping into the homes and houses of the middle class, and that's convergence, a level of unhappiness. If we were to bring citizens into this room, they'll probably use stronger language than what, for instance, Guku has said. So that convergence is happening, and I think the sooner government listens and hears, the better. But I must say, I found the minister's approach to the presentation today very constructive. He didn't come here to defend and hide behind long stories. He came to tell us, to say, yes, we are facing an uphill as a country. But why are these things happening? In my view, this is also pointing to a governance crisis of sorts, Minister. And I'll just raise a few points because of time. The first one is actually, I think we have a policy crisis that's contributing to all of these issues. There's often a mistake that we commit as a country to say the problem is not policies, it's implementation. But I think we need to go back to that question, because we can't say we have the right policies and yet the rate and level of inequality continues. The quality of education that the majority of our children are receiving in schools is showing no improvement. The fact that 1 million kids start grade 1 and only less than 500,000 actually pass matric with the right to enter tertiary institutions. So there is an education policy that you can say is progressive, but if policies do not enable a state to attain its political objectives as contained in the policy, then there's cause to go back to those policies and say, are these policies correct? Are we implementing them properly? Do we have the capacity to implement them? But do we have enough instruments in place to make sure that we monitor, evaluate implementation of those policies? And if failing in that regard, we must also be able to say, who do we hold accountable? Who do we hold accountable? On public services, Minister, I think you've given us a picture that's going to give a lot of us sleepless nights. But what I found quite not articulated very clearly in your presentation is state-owned enterprises. You do mention them in passing,
But as I recall, in 1994, we had said state-owned enterprises are going to be the engine of growth. The engine of growth, all of them. But is there any good story to tell about most of our SOEs? I was flying to Brazil a couple of weeks ago to attend the UN conference. It was quite a shame I felt that, in fact, the fact that as you look around airports in many parts of the world, you don't see your national airline featuring in any one of them, just made or reminded me of the extent to which we're in crisis. ESCOM, one doesn't need to say much. We're talking about Transnet in crisis, but what is the impact of the failure of state enterprises on the fiscs that we've been told about this evening? The amount of money that has been poured into state-owned enterprises that at the end of the day are also on the verge of collapse. So there's a problem there. Again, policy, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, are our governance systems strong enough? So let me conclude by just making 4 points. The first one being, all the speakers have talked about state capacity. I think that this is a major problem we face, especially because we are on the brink of, most likely, the minister may say this, having a coalition government at the national level. But what we've seen at local government level, the impact of these coalition governments on service delivery has been immense. We talk about traffic lights not working in most parts. I'm talking about my city now, in Drakensberg. We're starting to reach a point where it's not just a question of traffic lights not working. It's traffic lights being stolen and not existing in some major intersections in the country. The Auditor General's report in the 2021-2022 financial year says, in auditing municipalities, the state paid salaries of 1.2 billion rands to managers who are supposed to prepare and manage the books of municipalities. But the very same municipalities spent 1.4 billion rands paying consultants to prepare the financial statements. And when the Auditor General looked at those statements, they found numerous errors in those statements, which basically shows that many of the public officials who are employing in the state do not have the capacity to do their jobs, and they outsource that capacity to private entities or consulting firms. Now, if you outsource, you don't have capacity to understand what is expected of you and what they're supposed to do. At the end of the day, money is going down the drain. Let me just conclude. I can see all of us are hungry. I'm going to put one phrase that is, I'm telling here, the most forgotten phrase. Tumamena. It's a phrase about government getting closer to people in view and saying, what can you as citizens do to help us solve these problems? I come from a university. We're in the cold phase of getting to understand what is meant when we say there's limited capacity in the state. And as universities, we are there to provide the training, to do the research, but it is a distance between ourselves and the state. So if the state says citizens must get involved, it must get rid of the fear of working with civil society, with citizens, and institutions such as universities. Bon appetit.
Thank you very much to all our speakers. Can we please give them another round of applause? Different thoughts, insight from different perspectives, reality forcing us to think about whether or not we have the kind of resources we ought to have to deal with the challenges that we have. We have to jettison rhetoric and deal with reality. Dogma no longer applies. we are captives of ideology. There's certain things that we need to be practical about, and whether ask ourselves whether we have the human capital necessary to think differently and do the things that we want to do. We came in here a few years ago. Renewal to Mamina, we are in the dark, as you say. It's a time for, do we need to do something else to revive our leaders, or is it time to completely replace them? Do they have the capacity to reimagine themselves, to get some steam somewhere to do the things that they want to do? Do they have the energy? They know the problems. We have the policies, Nick, we have the policies and everything else. Why aren't these policies being implemented? It's a crisis, but quite certain what it means is that we are stagnant. We are stagnant. Something's got to happen. What exactly? We don't know. Perhaps in the course of the next few days, we'll come up with some ideas pointing us toward the right direction. Thank you very much. Gugu and I were speaking earlier about whether or not I should allow you Q&A. I'm hungry. I'm sure you're also hungry. She said 2 questions, but my fear is that if I say 2 questions, there'll be 3 questions, and they'll take 20 minutes to answer the 3 questions. So by the powers vested in me, I say no Q&A. We go for dinner. Thank you very much. We're meeting here tomorrow again, just after 8. I can't remember exactly, but you have your programs. Let's start on time today. Dinner is served on your left and go out. Thank you. Bye-bye. No.